Close your eyes for a moment. Can you remember the sharp, earthy smell of coal briquettes burning in the narrow alleyways on a crisp winter morning? Or perhaps the rhythmic, metallic clicking of a heavy bicycle chain as thousands of workers made their way through the morning mist? Today we are going quietly back in time, to the 1970s and 80s in China. We are going to revisit 20 everyday rules and rituals that were completely normal to us back then, but would seem absolutely bizarre to anyone growing up today. But as you will see, these were not just rules. They were the very fabric of our youth. And stay with me until the end, because we will remember one particular evening ritual that might just bring a tear to your eye. Life back then moved at a remarkably different pace. The hands of the clock seemed to turn slower, unbothered by the frantic rushing of the modern world. Today, people believe that because we did not have instant messaging or pockets full of screens, our lives were somehow empty or emotionally poor. But you and I know the truth. Our world was infinitely richer in genuine human connection. The simple act of waiting was a virtue, not an inconvenience. We waited for letters, we waited in lines, we waited for seasons to change to taste a specific fruit. And in all that waiting, we talked to each other. We looked into each other's eyes. We shared what little we had, knowing that our true wealth was not measured in coins, but in the enduring warmth of our community, our neighbors, and our families. Let us first remember the absolute necessity of the grain coupon. Today, you simply tap a piece of plastic to buy a mountain of food. But back in the 1970s, money alone was virtually useless without those tiny, fragile slips of paper. You carried your regional grain coupons with a reverence usually reserved for family heirlooms. Do you remember the texture of that thin paper between your fingers? The intricate, pale ink designs faded from being passed through so many working hands. Your mother would carefully fold them into a hidden pocket of her tunic before walking to the grain station. Losing your grain ration ticket was not just an inconvenience. It was a profound household tragedy. When we bought flour or rice, the attendant would meticulously inspect the ticket, stamp it with a heavy thud, and only then would the heavy wooden scoop plunge into the giant burlap sack. The smell of raw flour and dusty grain hung heavy in the air of the state-run shop. It taught us to respect every single grain that ended up in our bowls, understanding the immense collective effort it took to bring that bowl of rice to the family table. And now let us think about the daily pilgrimage for hot water. In modern kitchens, boiling water is a silent 10-second affair with an electric kettle. But in our youth, getting hot water was a communal event. Every neighborhood or factory had a designated hot water station, a place of constant activity. You would grab your large metal thermoses, the ones painted with bright red peonies or the double happiness character, and walk down the street, feeling the chill of the morning air. The air around the boiler room was always thick with white, hissing steam, smelling faintly of coal, damp ash, and warm iron. You stood in line with your neighbors, exchanging the day's gossip and discussing the evening's dinner plans, while the large brass taps roared loudly, filling your thermos to the brim. The soft cork stopper was pressed firmly in, and you carried it back home with extreme care, feeling the heavy, comforting warmth radiating against your leg as you walked. That water was our morning tea, our evening wash, our comfort in the bitter winters. It was a chore, certainly, but it was also the heartbeat of the neighborhood courtyard, a daily rhythm we all shared without question. Surely you have not forgotten the great winter cabbage hoarding. Today, modern grocery stores offer exotic vegetables in the dead of winter. But back then, the arrival of November meant only one thing. The rumbling cabbage trucks had finally arrived from the countryside. It was an unspoken, rigid rule that a family needed to buy hundreds of pounds of Chinese cabbage to survive the harsh winter months. The gray streets were suddenly transformed into a vibrant sea of green and white. Do you recall the sight of entire sidewalks and brick courtyard walls lined with cabbages drying in the pale autumn sun? The crisp, slightly peppery green smell filled every corner of the neighborhood. Families would meticulously wrap them in old newspapers, storing them in every available corner, under heavy wooden beds, in dark hallways, and on freezing balconies. By February, the outer leaves were withered and yellow, but the inside remained a pale, sweet green. We ate it boiled, stir-fried with a tiny scrap of pork fat, pickled in massive clay jars, and stuffed into steaming dumplings. It was monotonous, yes, but seeing that towering pile of cabbage gave us a deep, comforting sense of security against the cold months ahead. Let us turn our memories to our most prized mode of transportation. Today, bicycles are casually left on sidewalks or rented by the minute. But in the 1970s, owning a bicycle was a monumental achievement. A Flying Pigeon or a Phoenix bicycle was the equivalent of a luxury car today. And just like a car, it had to be officially registered. Can you picture the small metallic license plate bolted firmly onto the front mudguard or the frame? You had to go to the local police station to register your bike, and you paid an annual tax for it. Men would spend their Sunday mornings carefully wiping down the black enamel frame with an oiled rag, making the chrome handlebars shine fiercely in the bright sun. The gentle ringing of the silver bell was the universal soundtrack of our bustling streets. When you rode that heavy bicycle, you sat up straight, filled with an undeniable sense of pride. You joined the great flowing river of cyclists moving together through the wide, dusty avenues of the city, a sea of ringing bells and spinning spokes that defined the rhythm of urban life. Think back to the colors of our youth, or rather, the deliberate lack of them. Walk down a street today and you will be blinded by neon clothing and fast fashion logos. But in those days, our wardrobes were governed by an unspoken rule of uniformity. The streets were a rolling ocean of navy blue, olive green, and slate gray Mao suits. To wear something brightly colored or intricately patterned was not just unusual, it was considered inappropriate and bourgeois. Yet in that sea of conformity, we found our own quiet, dignified ways to express ourselves. Do you remember how we paid intense attention to the smallest details? The absolute quality of the stitching, the crisp neatness of a collar, a slightly different cut of the jacket, or a hand-knitted scarf hidden just beneath the chin. We did not need flashy labels to recognize care and dignity. The rough, comforting texture of sturdy cotton, washed over and over until it was incredibly soft and slightly faded at the seams, told a story of a hard-working, honest life that we all shared and respected deeply. We did not need vibrant colors to stand out, because our unity was our greatest strength. And what about the way we thought about our futures? Young people today constantly change jobs, moving frantically from one company to another in search of slightly better pay. In our time, the golden rule was the iron rice bowl. When you finally finished your schooling, the state assigned you a job. You did not send out resumes or sit through endless, nerve-wracking interviews. You simply received a stamped piece of paper telling you exactly where you would work for the rest of your natural life. Whether you were sent to a noisy textile mill, a quiet government office, or a blazing steel factory, that specific work unit became your entire universe. They provided your modest housing, your essential medical care, and your children's schooling. The heavy scent of machine oil, the chalk dust of a classroom, or the endless clicking of typewriters became the steady, predictable rhythm of your daily existence. You worked alongside the very same comrades for decades, sharing every single joy, birth, and sorrow over cups of hot tea. It meant you had no absolute choice in your career path, But it also meant you never had to lie awake at night worrying about starving or losing your livelihood. You belonged to something permanent and vast, a feeling of absolute, unwavering security that is almost entirely lost in today's fast-paced world. Let us talk about the clothes on our backs again. There was a strict rule in every household, whispered like a sacred proverb. New for 3 years, old for 3 years. Mend for 3 years. In a modern world of cheap, disposable clothing, the idea of wearing a visibly patched garment today is often seen as a sign of extreme poverty. But to us, it was the absolute norm and a point of pride. When the elbows of a jacket inevitably wore thin, a mother or grandmother would sit quietly by the dim yellow light of a low-wattage bulb, her needle flashing patiently in the shadows. Do you remember the rough, comforting feel of a meticulously applied square patch on your knee? We saved every single scrap of old fabric, eventually turning unwearable trousers into soft shoe soles, layering cloth with sticky paste to make thick, sturdy bases for our traditional cloth shoes. Absolutely nothing was ever carelessly thrown away. The warm scent of starch and old cotton hung in the quiet air of every home. Those patches were not seen as badges of shame or poverty. They were intricate, visible maps of a mother's relentless love, boundless patience, and resourceful care, ensuring her family was always protected from the biting cold. And now let us remember the golden rules of starting a family. Today, a young couple might expect a diamond ring, a shiny new car, or even a purchased house before considering marriage. But for those of us getting married in the 1970s, the ultimate, undeniable symbols of prosperity and readiness were the 3 great things: a wristwatch, a bicycle, and a sewing machine. Do you remember the sheer awe of seeing a brand new Shanghai brand mechanical watch resting gently on a velvet cloth? The incredibly precise, rapid ticking against your ear was the literal sound of a secure, modern future. A Flying Pigeon bicycle meant you could travel the wide avenues with absolute dignity. And a heavy Butterfly brand sewing machine meant your new family would always be warmly clothed. The heavy cast-iron wheel of the sewing machine, turning smoothly in the corner of a small, dimly lit room, was a source of immense pride and comfort. To acquire these 3 extraordinary items required months, sometimes years of frugal saving, and pooling together scarce industrial coupons from the entire extended family. When the bride finally moved in, these treasures were proudly displayed in the center of the room for all the neighborhood aunties and uncles to admire and praise. Think about the living spaces we occupied. Modern apartment buildings isolate us completely behind heavy, locked steel doors, where we barely know the names of the people living just feet away from us. Our childhoods were lived out in the wide-open communal courtyards and sprawling, lively factory dormitories. The modern concept of absolute privacy simply did not exist back then. Families lived tightly in single rooms, and the shared courtyard was just a natural extension of your living room. You woke up early to the familiar sound of neighbors clearing their throats, sharply chopping vegetables on thick wooden blocks, and the violent sizzling of hot oil in cast-iron woks. Can you smell the mouth-watering mix of crushed garlic, dark soy sauce, and acrid coal smoke drifting effortlessly through the open doorways? If a mother was running late for her shift, a neighbor would pull her child over to their own small table and hand them a warm bowl of porridge without a second thought. We knew every loud argument over money, every triumph at school, and every quiet secret of the people living around us. It was incredibly noisy, perpetually cramped, and beautifully chaotic, but it wrapped around us like a warm, fiercely protective blanket that ensured we never, ever had to face the trials of life completely alone. Let us revisit a morning ritual that united the entire nation. Today, people go to expensive gyms completely alone, wearing heavy headphones to shut out the rest of the world. But back then, the pursuit of health was a synchronized, highly public duty. Every single morning at a specific hour, the crackling, authoritative voice from the tin loudspeakers mounted on wooden poles would echo loudly across schoolyards, factory grounds, and city squares. The bold, triumphant music would begin, and the stern voice would call out the counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hundreds of people in identical blue work clothes would stand in neat, disciplined rows, stretching their arms and bending their knees in absolute, perfect unison. The rhythmic swishing of rough cotton fabric and the synchronized shuffling of flat cloth shoes on the hard concrete created a mesmerizing, powerful sound. We groaned and complained about it, of course, shivering violently in the biting cold winter air, or sweating heavily in the thick, humid summer mornings. Yet standing shoulder to shoulder with our neighbors and friends, moving as one single, massive, breathing organism, instilled a deep, unspoken bond of solidarity between us all that words could never adequately describe. Do you remember the sheer emotional weight of distance and communication? Today, a casual text message travels across the globe in a fraction of a second. But back then, a long-distance message was an agonizing, highly sacred event. The arrival of a green uniformed postman on his heavy, squeaking bicycle was closely watched by absolutely everyone in the courtyard. If he carried a yellow telegram, your heart would skip a violent beat. Telegrams were so incredibly expensive that they were paid for by the individual word, leading to cryptic, terrifyingly brief messages that held either immense joy or devastating sorrow. And the letters. Can you recall the feeling of sitting quietly at a small wooden desk, carefully unscrewing the plastic cap of a hero fountain pen, the sharp chemical scent of blue-black ink instantly filling your nose? We wrote painfully slowly, pressing our deepest, most sincere feelings into the thin, fragile paper. When a letter finally arrived from a loved one stationed far away, you did not just read it once and put it away. You held it delicately, studied the familiar loops of the handwriting, and read it aloud to the assembled family over and over again, until the paper was soft, worn, and stained with nostalgic tears. Let us think about the lost art of recycling, long before it ever became a modern environmental buzzword. In our youth, the very idea of casually throwing away a metal toothpaste tube would have been considered utterly foolish and wasteful. Absolutely everything had a secondary, hidden value. Do you remember the itinerant peddlers who would walk slowly through the winding alleyways, rhythmically striking a wooden block or ringing a small, clear bell? They were the scrap collectors. We children would diligently save our empty, flattened aluminum toothpaste tubes, along with broken glass bottles and tiny scraps of copper wire. When the peddler finally came, we would rush out of our doorways, our small hands clutching these meager treasures tightly. The peddler would weigh them carefully on a small handheld brass scale, the metal weights clinking softly against each other. In exchange, he would hand us a few worn fen coins, or better yet, a generous piece of sticky, sweet malt sugar, heavily coated in white flour. The intense, lingering taste of that hard-earned candy, melting slowly on the tongue, was infinitely better than any expensive, packaged chocolate you could simply buy in a modern supermarket today. It taught us that absolute value could be found in the most unexpected, discarded places. And what about the weekly ritual of the public bath? Modern homes have private showers with endless, instant hot water. But for us, bathing was a planned excursion. On a cold Saturday afternoon, you would pack a small cloth bag with a clean, stiff towel, a piece of coarse, yellow laundry soap, and a simple wooden comb. You walked to the bustling neighborhood bathhouse, parting the heavy, damp canvas curtain at the front door. The humid air inside was so thick with rolling steam, you could barely see the wooden lockers just a few feet away. It smelled strongly of sulfur, harsh soap lye, and wet cedar wood. You would lower yourself slowly into the scalding hot communal pool, letting the intense heat soak deeply into your weary bones, alongside your neighbors and colleagues. There was a unique, leveling intimacy in that room, scrubbing each other's backs with rough, fibrous loofah sponges, washing away the stubborn grime of a hard week's physical labor. The loud, boisterous chatter, the echoing laughter bouncing off the wet, cracked, tiled walls, and the raw, unpretentious humanity of the neighborhood bathhouse is a vivid memory etched deeply and permanently into our souls. Let us recall the gentle sound of clicking needles in the quiet evening. Today, if a modern sweater shrinks in the wash or gets a tiny hole, it is carelessly thrown into the trash. But in the 1970s, pure wool was an incredibly precious commodity. Every single mother and grandmother possessed the magical, necessary skill of knitting. When a sweater was outgrown by a child or worn completely thin at the elbows, the long ritual of unraveling began. Can you feel the slight tension in the crinkly yarn as you held your hands far apart, acting as a human spool, while your mother wound the used wool into a tight, round ball? Later, she would carefully wash the yarn and hang it with weights to dry, straightening the stubborn kinks. In the dim, quiet evening light, under the soft yellow glow of a kerosene lamp or a single low-wattage bulb, the polished bamboo needles would click rhythmically and endlessly. Knit, purl, knit, purl. It took weeks of patient, back-breaking labor to create a completely new garment from the tired old yarn. Wearing that heavy, slightly scratchy wool sweater, knowing it was woven exclusively with your mother's endless patience and protective love, provided a profound warmth that no factory-made, synthetic fleece could ever hope to match. Think back to the sweltering summer nights before the widespread invention of air conditioning. Today, families lock themselves behind thick, closed windows, completely isolated in artificially cooled, quiet rooms. But in our time, the oppressive heat naturally drove us out into the communal world. When the burning sun finally set and the concrete ground stopped radiating heat, an unspoken, delightful rule brought the entire neighborhood outdoors. Fathers would carry heavy bamboo beds or wooden folding chairs out to the dusty street. Mothers would carefully slice a single, incredibly precious watermelon, perfectly cold from being soaked all afternoon in a metal bucket of deep well water. Do you remember the gentle, rhythmic rustling of the large palm leaf fans, waving back and forth to keep the relentless mosquitoes away? The humid air smelled heavily of burning green mosquito coils and damp, cooling earth. We children would sit cross-legged on the dusty ground, listening with wide eyes to the elders tell terrifying ghost stories or recount epic tales from their turbulent youth, while the unseen cicadas sang their deafening, rhythmic chorus in the ancient elm trees above. We were sweating and hot, yes, but we were absolutely, wonderfully together, bound by the simple magic of a shared summer breeze. Let us remember a small, seemingly insignificant everyday object that entirely defined our working lives. If you walk into any office building today, you see insulated titanium travel mugs and expensive disposable coffee cups. But in the 1970s and 80s, the undisputed universal king of beverages was the repurposed glass jar, specifically the empty canned fruit jars. Once the precious syrupy yellow peaches or white pears were happily consumed on a rare sick day or a special holiday, the thick glass jar was washed clean and given a noble new life. Every single worker, from loud factory floors to quiet government desks, carried one. Do you remember the sharp, heavy clink of the glass lid being set down on a scarred wooden desk? You would throw a generous handful of cheap, fragrant jasmine tea leaves into the bottom and pour in boiling water straight from the thermos. You had to hold it gingerly by the very top rim to avoid burning your calloused fingers on the scorching glass. Looking through the scratched, cloudy sides of the jar, quietly watching the dried green leaves dramatically unfurl and slowly sink to the bottom of the murky water, was a precious, quiet moment of meditation and rest in the middle of a long, exhausting, and physically demanding day at the factory. And now let us revisit the pure, unadulterated magic of the screen. Today, absolutely every person stares blankly at a glowing private rectangle in the palm of their hand. But there was a magnificent time when a single television set could unite an entire village. When the very first black and white 9-inch television arrived in a neighborhood, it was placed carefully on a high table in a courtyard or a communal room, treated almost like a sacred altar. It was a firm, unbreakable rule that absolutely anyone could come watch. Do you remember the chaotic, noisy scrambling for the best spots? Children would drag their small wooden stools to the very front, while adults stood patiently in the back, loudly cracking sunflower seeds. The screen would suddenly crackle to life with a shockingly loud pop, glowing with a ghostly, flickering blue light in the dark courtyard. We watched absolutely whatever was broadcast, entirely mesmerized by the grainy, snowy images of news anchors or stiff dramas. The shared gasps during a dramatic film, the roaring collective laughter, the loud groans when the fragile signal was lost, and someone had to run up and frantically adjust the rabbit ear antennas. The television itself was tiny, but the shared emotional experience was absolutely immense. Let us stay with the wonderful magic of moving pictures for a moment longer. Before every home had a television, the arrival of the traveling projectionist was a true neighborhood festival. They would set up the heavy mechanical projector in the middle of a village threshing floor or a wide factory sports field. The rule was beautifully simple: bring your own seat. The anticipation built to a fever pitch as a large square white sheet was hoisted up between two tall wooden poles, billowing slightly in the evening wind. Can you smell the unique, unforgettable blend of dusty earth, cracked sunflower seeds, and the metallic, slightly burning odor of the hot projector lamp? When the intense, dusty beam of light finally cut through the pitch-dark night, a hushed, reverent silence fell over hundreds of restless people. We watched heroic black and white war films or dramatic revolutionary operas, often for the 5th or 6th time, knowing every single dramatic line of dialogue by heart. When the heavy film reel had to be carefully changed halfway through, the loud collective sigh of impatience proved just how deeply we were transported from our difficult, mundane daily lives into that flickering, magical world of light and shadow. Think about how we slowly traveled across the land. High-speed bullet trains now slice silently through the Chinese countryside, but our journeys were epic, incredibly sensory adventures on the slow, green trains. The slow green train was not just a mode of transport, it was a rolling, chaotic, deeply human village. The moment you stepped onto the hard-seat carriage, you were hit by a solid wall of smells: harsh tobacco smoke, instant noodles, unwashed bodies, and peeling oranges. The train chugged along with a heavy, hypnotic, rhythmic clatter. Clack, 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 literally shaking your very bones. Finding a seat meant squeezing tightly and awkwardly next to complete strangers. But within a single hour, those very strangers were happily sharing their hard-boiled eggs, salty dried tofu, and roasted peanuts with you. The heavy metal windows were always pushed wide open, letting in the black, stinging soot from the roaring engine, and the incredibly sweet, earthy smell of the passing rural fields. It took agonizing days to cross the vast country. But in that confined, noisy space, we truly learned the deep meaning of patience and the immense comfort of transient human camaraderie. Finally, let us remember exactly how we captured our fading memories. Today you take hundreds of casual photos a day and delete them without a second thought. In the 1970s, taking a photograph was a rare, solemn, and highly orchestrated event. You only went to the official state-run photo studio for major, undeniable milestones, exactly 100 days after a baby's birth, a marriage, or just before a long, painful separation. Do you remember the distinct, acidic smell of the chemical developer fluid lingering heavily in the waiting room? The photographer, usually an older, serious man, would position you carefully under blindingly bright, extremely hot lamps. You were strictly told to sit perfectly still, your back ramrod straight against the wooden chair, your expression remarkably serious and heavily dignified. The heavy mechanical clunk of the large-format camera shutter sounded exactly like a heavy bank vault door closing. Days later, you would excitedly return to pick up the small, glossy black and white print, perhaps with the cheeks artificially and carefully tinted with a faint, painted pink watercolor. We kept those few precious photos behind a sheet of heavy glass on our wooden dressers, honoring them every day as the fragile, unrepeatable fragments of our fleeting, beautiful youth. As we look back on these 20 rules and rituals, it is incredibly easy for the younger generation to see them simply as hardships. But you and I know the profound truth. We do not really miss the patched clothes, the agonizing wait for a telegram, or the heavy rationing tickets. What we truly ache for is the way those things made us feel. We miss the undeniable, warm sense of belonging to a community where every door was open and every hardship was shared. We miss the slow, deliberate pace of a world that forced us to look deeply into each other's eyes and truly appreciate the small, hard-earned joys of life. Above all, we miss our youth and the beautiful people who walked through those dusty, vibrant streets by our sides. If this journey back in time brought a warm memory to your heart, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. It helps us keep these precious histories alive. And now, I would love to hear from you. Which of these memories resonated with you the most, or what was your own unique routine in those days? Please write your story in the comments below. I will read every single one. Thank you for remembering with me.